In the last video, I talked about uh, how I happened to write my initial years of my career, a number of books. By 1983 or so, I have written almost about a dozen books. Uh, to a large extent, besides working with a colleague like Dr. Uday Parikh, I must acknowledge the contributions of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. IIM culture encouraged publications. IIM culture encouraged research and dissemination. IIM culture encouraged also writing case studies. When I was doing the entrepreneurship project in 1973-74 itself, as soon as the project was over, I came across some very interesting entrepreneurial case studies, and I have written about half a dozen case studies of small scale entrepreneurs. These case studies are not more than a page or two, but these are very useful kind of case studies. So I could write this because there is a culture, there is a milieu, and there is also, it's not pressure, but I also enjoy, I think, writing. What I enjoy in writing is if I have an idea or an experience or a research data, I would like to share it immediately with a large number of people. I get a phenomenal amount of pleasure in sharing the knowledge I have generated and so on. So that is the theme, and I would like to say that the principal facilitator of this is certainly Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Besides having a colleague like Uday Parikh in my initial years, who would be mostly my senior author and would encourage me, would correct me. My English is not a great kind of an English because my schooling was in a Telugu medium. I started learning English only when I went to Loyola College, and probably even in Loyola College we didn't have to communicate too much in English. So real use of English started with uh, towards the end of my BSc, and then in B.Ed, where I was in Mysore with the Regional College of Education, and of course MA Psychology certainly has added to this orientation. So I'm not very great in terms of writing a flowery language. Though I used to read books like my books were books like Dale Carnegie's books, or Discovery of India, and some of the history and other kind of books and so on. Uh, by 1983, we already have a handbook for entrepreneurs. We have a handbook for training of education managers. We have a handbook for training of entrepreneurs. 1985, 5 February, March, we had the symposium on recent experiences in human resource development, which was held as a part of the Center for HRD at XLRI and Larsen and Tobro. Uh, I was L&T professor, so one of the requirements we have put as a part of the L&D professorship was to conduct an annual seminar. So for that also we took the help of Denison Pereira. So we held the first conference, or you call it symposium. That's where the National HRD Network was born. So this particular symposium led to wonderful papers that were formulated by people who attended the program. So we published that as recent experiences in HRD, with Denison Pereira as my co-author. After that, the HRD network was born, and we wanted to hold a program. The first conference was designed at Chennai, and that's a very interesting story. After I got back from XLRI, Professor Pradeep Khandwala of IIM Ahmedabad, he held an international conference on social development programs. And in this particular conference of social development programs, some 300 to 400 pages of material was produced. Robert Golombevsky, Robert Brown, a whole lot of people from across the world came to IIM Ahmedabad and presented their papers, and it was a great program. But mind you, in the year 1986, 87, this was the time we were having this particular program. We didn't have the technology we had. Those days, even Xeroxing was not well known. It was largely all materials were cyclostyle. Maybe a few Xerox machines were there, so they were Xeroxed. So when this 400 page material was Xeroxed or copied and distributed to about 200, 250 delegates, the bill came to be a fat amount. And the bill came for discussion in the Policy Planning Committee of IIMA. When I looked at the bill for producing a 400 page document and bringing it out, I think if I recollect vaguely, this was something like over a lakh of rupees. So I said, if we're going to spend 1 lakh of rupees cyclostyling material, why don't we, if we hold a conference, make sure that we come up with a, if the papers are good, get the papers beforehand, edit them and make them available, get them printed and distribute. That is when we discussed with Rawat Publications. Uh, Dr. At that time, Anil Khandelwal was a senior faculty at Bank of Baroda. He put me in touch with Rawatji. So we invited Rawatji and requested him. We're going to hold the National HRD conference. We probably will have some excellent papers for this. We'll give you these papers. How can you produce? So we costed the papers, and then the cost came to be something like about uh, 25 rupees a book in those days. So that means about 500 copies. If we made 500 copies, it was 50 rupees or something like that. We made 1,000 rupees, it would be 25. So we said that why don't we pay 50% of the cost and then you give us 500 copies. Print 1,000 and we pay you 25,000 rupees. Give us 500 copies. And the remaining copies you sell it in the market. He agreed with that, and therefore we made sure that the first conference of the National HRD Network, the day people came for the conference, they are handed over a hard copy, Alternative Approaches and Strategies of Human Resource Development, with all excellent papers available to people. That had set a totally new trend in the, and also it's a publication. So that became the second publication. The first publication where National HRD Network was conceived was Recent Experiences. The second, actually, rather, I think it should be called as the first kind of a publication, is the Alternative Approaches and Strategies of Human Resources Development. Subsequently, I was invited by Commonwealth Secretariat to write a book on, along with one Mr. Wright from one of the African countries, and uh, there was one Hena Mukherjee who was in the Commonwealth Secretariat. She sponsored this project. I happened to visit London about 3 4 times. We gathered a lot of information from different Commonwealth countries and came up with a book on training uh, heads of schools and other places for developing entrepreneurial development programs in their vocational training and so on. So that was a very interesting book, but it was published by Commonwealth Secretariat London itself. That put me in touch with the Commonwealth Secretariat, and of course, at that point of time, my ex-colleague Mohan Kaul was at Commonwealth Secretariat London, and he invited me to participate in a project on human resource development. So I went there, spent a few months at Institute of Development Studies, Sussex, and that resulted in another book called Human Resource Development Context, Concepts, Experiences, and so on, where I think I have covered HRD totally at a different level. Just before that, while I was leaving XLRI, I think we gathered a large number of articles and essays, and my own, largely my own, applied to HRD in corporate sector, applied to HRD in education. That was the time when the new HRD ministry was formed. So I wrote an article on the HRD ministry and its role and things like that. Putting all these things together, including my Indonesian experience, I wrote a book called Readings in Human Resources Development. I think that becomes the second phase of starting work on HRD and HRD books. When we were holding the next conference uh, on HRD, the conference focused on HRD for workmen. And I have done very little work in HRD for Workman, except that it was conceptualized during my tenure as the first president of National HRD Network, conducted during Nayar's tenure. So you will find a thick, fat book containing all articles on HRD for Workman without my name, because I was not an author. Whereas in the other books, I was wherever I was an author, I did not hesitate to put myself. So this is one publication where you will find the author is National HRD Network and no single individual. But during the time, we were quite unhappy with the way preparation of HRD professionals was going on. So, because of our unhappiness, we said we must hold the next symposium on excellence through HRD. How do you prepare HRD people? So we got union leaders to write, we got CEOs to write, we got HRD professionals like Rajan Gupta to write, and we compiled this. And MRR Nair and I edited this book, Excellence Through Human Resource Development. So that was another kind of a book that was there. And around that time, I was getting impatient with the way HRD is being interpreted, the way HRD is being misused, the HRD is being. So, in the symposium, I said our focus has got to be bring HRD with its focus. In fact, the very purpose of starting National HRD Network was to promote human resource development movement. So, my restlessness with the way HRD is being practiced or not practiced led to my writing a small book called HRD Missionary. So I used to feel that HRD people should work like missionaries. If they don't work like missionaries, HRD is not going to see the light of the day. So by about 93, 94, by the time I uh, completed my 20 years at IIM Ahmedabad, I would have had almost about 40 books, largely on HRD, on performance appraisal, which was a remarkable kind of a book, on HRD in education, HRD for health systems. In fact, it was during the period when Satya and I were working with the Asia Pacific Development Center. We wrote a interesting book for managing clinics. Uh, Managing clinics. And largely, I have written on behavioral science part. Satya wrote on the MIS part and things like that. So, whatever work we do, we feel the outside environment is not yet ready with the kind of concepts we are promoting, the experiences we have had. So, the mission of IIM Ahmedabad was to professionalize management in all sections of the society, and we perceived that we are agents of professionalizing management. And always Ravi Mathai said there is not one way of professionalizing management, there are many ways. And when you write, when you disseminate, you are contributing to the so called professionalization of management. It is this desire, the drive that was given by IIM Ahmedabad that was responsible for many of us to translate whatever little things we have done and bring it in the form of book. That is why by 1985, 1984 end, when I left IIM Ahmedabad, I had almost about 40 publications, some by my own, some with people like Uday Pari, Pashanji, Anil Bhatt, T.P. Ramarao, Anil Khandelwal, Father Abraham, and so on. I mean, that has set the entire trend. And the last 20 books that I have written, 15 to 20 books, were really my original contributions, not with any co-authors, although there were co-authors as far as TVRLS was concerned. So this is the second phase of my writing, which will explain to you the secrets behind my being an author. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will come back with the last part of this in the next video.